Your own mind is, I don't know, a bit of a stranger to you? Or maybe you've wondered where those sudden, totally unshakable thoughts actually come from? Well, you're in exactly the right place. Welcome to this explainer on the hidden, sometimes terrifying forces that secretly govern our lives, pulled straight from Carl Jung's groundbreaking 1937 Terry Lectures. We're anchoring today's deep dive in this incredible historic text, Psychology and Religion, which Jung delivered over at Yale. In these pages, he really breaks down the raw mechanics of the human psyche. And honestly, he does it in a way that feels absolutely crucial, even urgent for us to grasp today. So right off the bat, I really want you to ask yourself, are your thoughts completely under your control? Or do they just kind of happen to you without your permission? It's a pretty unsettling thought, right? I mean, we all love to think we're the absolute monarchs of our own brains, but Jung is about to show us exactly why that's just a complete illusion. So here is the roadmap for how we're going to unpack this whole thing today. We'll start with the science of the soul, look into the numinosum experience, check out the reality of the psyche, move into the autonomous unconscious, and finally, we'll confront the perils of the soul. Let's get into it.
Number 1. Science of the soul. Now, Jung approaches this whole topic from what he calls a phenomenological standpoint. Basically, he's acting strictly as an empiricist here. He's demanding that we treat ideas, even super mystical ones, like the motif of a virgin birth, as undeniable, objective scientific facts, just because they naturally occur in the human mind. He doesn't really care about debating if a religious story is historically true. To him, if human beings experience it, it's psychologically true. The fact that it exists is the truth, not some philosophical judgment call.
I absolutely love this quote from him, because it hits the nail right on the head. An elephant is true because it exists. Just like a zoologist studies an elephant without asking if it philosophically should exist, psychology has to study spontaneous human ideas in the exact same way. We're so used to treating our thoughts like these random, arbitrary inventions, but Jung is telling us no, treat them as naturally occurring phenomena, literally just like elephants. Moving on to Section 2, the numinosum experience. Jung borrows this term, the numinosum, from Rudolf Otto to define what original religion actually is. And the main takeaway here is that original religion isn't a choice. It's not some logical conclusion you casually figure out on a Sunday. No, it is this overwhelming, totally involuntary condition. It's a dynamic force that literally seizes and controls you. You don't create the numinosum, you're its victim. It comes from the outside in and completely hijacks your consciousness. And you really have to contrast that wild, terrifying, original religious experience with everyday creed and dogma. Jung actually argues that organized creeds in these rigid dogmatic institutions, they aren't the original experience at all. They're actually safe, codified defense mechanisms. They were meticulously built to protect us from the sheer, terrifying unpredictability of an actual numinous encounter. It's basically like building a safe, ritualistic fence around a psychological explosive. All right, Section 3, Reality of the Psyche. Just how powerful are these internal forces? Well, Jung drops these rapid-fire clinical examples that are just mind-blowing. He talks about treating a case of hysterical fever, literally hitting 102 degrees that vanished in minutes just because the patient confessed a psychological secret. He saw a patient whose entire body was covered in severe psoriasis get 90% better just from psychological treatment. And get this, he even details a case of extreme colon distension. A patient literally had 40 centimeters of their colon surgically removed, and the issue immediately came back. But once they uncovered the underlying psychological facts, the colon just started functioning normally again. That is the undeniable, tangible reality of the psyche. These so-called imaginary conflicts can literally rewrite your physical biology. Which brings us to Section 4, the autonomous unconscious. Let's walk through this specific, rather dark case Jung shares about a patient with an imaginary cancer. And to be clear, this isn't just a guy worrying too much. First, a completely morbid idea appears spontaneously. It just invades his consciousness. Then, the idea overgrows and possesses the victim exactly like a literal carcinoma. Even with doctors explicitly telling him he's completely physically healthy, the complex completely takes over. Finally, the patient suffers this total humiliating defeat. It becomes an absolute obsession that ends up completely poisoning his soul and all of his relationships. Jung actually has to deliver a really harsh truth to this patient. He tells him, look, this imaginary cancer isn't going to kill your physical body, but it will absolutely kill your soul. The guy is utterly destroyed by something that a medical doctor would technically call unreal.
And it totally proves Jung's point that psychical dangers can actually be way more destructive and way more contagious than any physical epidemic.
This boils down to a brilliantly chilling sentence. The man is not master in his own house. Let that sink in. Jung is explaining that these complexes basically act like autonomous beings. They're like secondary personalities living rent-free inside of us, with their own complete lives. We are not the originators of our own morbid thoughts. They bubble up from the unconscious, totally proving we do not have complete control over our own psychological real estate.
Section 5. Perils of the Soul.
So if our individual minds are this incredibly vulnerable, what happens when we zoom out to the scale of an entire society? Jung warns us that when people cram together to form a mob, the dynamics of the collective man take over. The dormant beasts and demons of the collective unconscious are just completely unleashed. You lose your individual consciousness in a group, and it leads to what ancient cultures very accurately called the perils of the soul. It's a terrifying psychological explosion.
He says man in the crowd is unconsciously lowered to an inferior moral and intellectual level. It's profound, and it's terrifyingly true. Jung points out how incredibly easy it is for our rational, everyday consciousness to just get swept away by these non-personal collective forces. It can take a completely gentle, reasonable person and turn them into an absolute savage, capable of doing things they wouldn't even dream of doing alone.
What's really fascinating here is how humanity historically tried to protect itself from this. Our ancestors, they actually intuitively understood these dangers. That's exactly why they developed all those elaborate forms of politeness, like speaking in hushed voices, bowing, or showing empty hands. They were trying to avoid triggering a dangerous loss of consciousness or a berserk state in the people around them. It's why the church built those dogmatic fences to safely contain the numinous experience. And it's why figures like Gilgamesh paid such close attention to warning dreams. They respected these psychic defenses because they knew they were crucial shields against an unruly, dangerous unconscious.
But modern society, we've kind of stripped away a lot of those ancient protections. We've undervalued the human soul, and we casually dismiss things like warning dreams as just silly superstitions. But Jung reminds us that we are, effectively, always living on top of a psychological volcano. So, knowing all of this, I'll leave you with this to ponder. Are you willing to dare to listen to the warning voices of your own unconscious mind before that volcano erupts? Thanks for hanging out with me.